Rome, winter of the year 66. The dungeon is freezing. The cold is cutting. An elderly man with white hair and trembling hands holds a parchment. His icy fingers can barely hold the pen. He spent 2 years imprisoned in Caesarea, was transferred to Rome, and now feels that death is near. Around him, silence. Many collaborators have fled, but there is something more urgent than the cold, something that needs to be said before it is too late. Paul writes with tears, "Try to come to me as soon as possible. It is not longing, it is urgency. When you come, bring the cloak that I left in Troas, and also the books, especially the parchments. The cloak is against the cold, the parchments are to continue the mission." But there is something more important in this letter. Paul is about to pass on to 2 young men the most impossible mission in history. One is in his early 20s, fragile in appearance and shy. The other is a pagan Greek whom Paul refused to circumcise. And then Paul makes the riskiest decision of his entire life, to trust everything to them. His name appeared 24 times in the New Testament. His 3 pastoral letters would guide the church for centuries. This is the story of St. Timothy and St. Titus, the disciples who remained when the whole world fled. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back a few decades. Lystra, a city 200 kilometers northeast of Tarsus in Asia Minor. A young man named Timothy lived there. His mother, Eunice, was Jewish. His grandmother, Lois, was as well. But his father was Greek and pagan. This made Timothy illegitimate in the eyes of the Jews, neither fully Jewish nor fully Gentile. But Eunice and Lois taught him the scriptures since he was a child. And when Paul arrived in Lystra preaching that the expected Messiah had arrived in the person of Jesus Christ, something happened. Timothy was only 20 years old and converted immediately. His mother and grandmother did as well. Paul saw something special in that young man. He was highly esteemed by the brothers in Lystra and Iconium. But there was a problem. So that Timothy could preach among the Jews, Paul needed to circumcise him. It was painful but necessary. From that moment on, Timothy never left Paul's side again. Meanwhile, on the other side of the story, there is Titus. He was Greek, pagan, from Antioch. He was converted by Paul on one of his journeys and became his closest collaborator. But when the year 48 arrived and Paul went to the Council of Jerusalem, something extraordinary happened. The Judaizing Christians wanted Titus to be circumcised. After all, if he was going to preach, he needed to follow the law of Moses. But Paul categorically refused. Titus would not be circumcised. Why? Because Titus represented something greater. Christianity was universal, independent of nationality, race, or culture. And so these 2 men became living symbols of an impossible truth. Timothy, the circumcised Jew who could preach among Jews. Titus, the uncircumcised Gentile who proved that the gospel was for everyone. One represented the law, the other represented faith. But something even greater was to come. For these 2 young men would cross 6 cities with Paul: Thessalonica, Philippi, Corinth, Ephesus, Athens, and Rome. And when everyone abandoned Paul, they would remain faithful. And then something extraordinary happens. Paul begins to send Timothy alone on the most difficult missions. The first is Corinth, a city known for immorality and rebellion. The Christian community there is divided, fighting among themselves, questioning Paul's authority. And whom does Paul send? A young man of fragile and shy appearance. The Corinthians look at Timothy and think, is this it? Is this the boy Paul sent? But Paul writes to the Corinthians firmly, "I am sending Timothy, my beloved and faithful son in the Lord. He will remind you of my rules of conduct." And he adds something that cuts like a sword. "Let no one despise your young age." Timothy goes, and he fulfills the mission. Next is Thessalonica, where the persecution is violent. Then Philippi, then Ephesus. In each city, Paul trusts him more, so much so that Timothy's name appears 24 times in the New Testament. It is not a coincidence. It is a testimony of fidelity. But the story does not end there, because while Timothy resolves problems in the churches, another crisis is exploding, Corinth again. But this time it is worse. The community is not just divided, it is in open rebellion against Paul. They refuse his instructions, question his authority and mock his letters. And Paul is far away, unable to go in person. So he does something desperate. He writes a severe, painful letter, directly confronting their errors. But who will take this letter? Who will face an entire enraged community? Paul chooses Titus, and Titus goes alone, carrying a letter that will surely leave many furious. He arrives in Corinth and delivers the letter. The reaction is explosive, but Titus does not back down. He speaks with firmness, with love, and with truth. He listens to the complaints, understands the wounds, but does not give up on the doctrine. Days pass, weeks, and then something impossible happens. The community calms down, the fighting ceases. Peace is restored. When Titus returns to Paul, the apostle writes with tears of relief, "God consoled me with the arrival of Titus." It was not just the news that consoled Paul. It was seeing that Titus had achieved the impossible, transforming a heart of stone into a heart of flesh. And now comes the part that would change everything. In the year 65, Paul consecrates Timothy as bishop of Ephesus, the first bishop of that city that would be so important to the church. Timothy is only in his early 20s, but Paul trusts him completely. In the following year, 66, Paul names him leader of the entire church of Asia Minor. Meanwhile, Titus is sent to Crete as bishop. Two crucial dioceses are in the hands of two young men, and for 15 years, Timothy leads Ephesus with wisdom. He faces false teachers, corrects heresies, establishes elders, and organizes the community. Paul writes 2 letters to him, teaching how a shepherd should act, how he should live, and how he should lead. For Titus, he writes 1 letter. 3 pastoral letters that would become the first guide for bishops of all time. But then in Rome, Paul's situation changes drastically. He is arrested again. This time there is no hope of release. Nero is persecuting Christians in Rome, and Paul knows his days are numbered. The dungeon is freezing, the harsh winter is approaching, and one by one his collaborators abandon him. Some do so out of fear, others for other missions. Titus is in Dalmatia, fulfilling a final task. Paul is alone, feeling the cold in his bones, and then he picks up the pen to write the most urgent letter of his life. "Timothy, dearest son, try to come to me as soon as possible." Every word is chosen with care because Paul knows it might be the last time he communicates with his most beloved disciple. "When you come, bring with you the cloak that I left in Troas at the house of Carpus." It is not just about the cold, it is about memory, about continuity, and also the books, especially the parchments. Because even near death, Paul wants to keep writing, teaching, and fighting. And then comes the warning that breaks the heart. Do your best to come before winter, because after winter it may be too late. The letter arrives in Ephesus. Timothy reads it with tears. He wants to run to Rome immediately, but there is something happening in Ephesus that cannot be ignored. It is the year 97. The city is celebrating. A great pagan celebration in honor of the goddess Diana, the patroness of Ephesus. The Temple of Diana is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and on this specific day, thousands of people fill the streets in a noisy procession. Drunkenness, orgies, and obscene rituals are all happening in the name of the goddess. Timothy watches from the window of his house. He could stay quiet, let the party pass, and leave for Rome the next day. No one would judge him. But then he remembers Paul's words, "Let no one despise your young age, but become a model for the faithful." And Timothy makes a decision. He leaves his house and goes straight to the center of the celebration. The crowd is in ecstasy. He climbs onto a platform and raises his voice. "People of Ephesus, listen. This worship is empty. Diana cannot save you. Only Christ can." Silence falls like a stone. Thousands of eyes turn to him, young, slight, and alone. And then the leaders of the pagan cult begin to scream, "Blasphemy! He insults the great Diana! Death to the Christian!" The crowd explodes. Stones begin to fly. Timothy is dragged from the platform. Blows, beatings, and stonings follow. He falls, gets up, and falls again. Blood flows from his head, but his lips continue to whisper, "Jesus Christ is Lord." And then everything goes dark. Timothy, the faithful disciple, the young bishop, the beloved son of Paul, gives his life for the faith. In the same year in Rome, Paul is also executed. Master and disciple, separated by kilometers, are united in martyrdom. But in Crete, Titus continues. He works until an advanced age, around the year 100, when he dies of natural causes, having preserved his virginity until the end. 3 lives, 3 destinies, the same fidelity. Timothy's blood was still fresh on the stones of Ephesus when something extraordinary began to happen. The 3 letters that Paul had written, 2 to Timothy and 1 to Titus, began to circulate among the churches. They were no ordinary letters. They were the first pastoral guide for bishops of all time. They taught how to choose leaders, how to combat false teachers, how to organize the community, and how to live the faith with integrity. And the name of Timothy, that shy young man whom no one took seriously, appeared 24 times in the New Testament, not as a footnote, but as a protagonist in the expansion of the gospel. In the 4th century, Timothy's relics were transferred from Ephesus to Constantinople and placed in the Church of the Holy Apostles. Later, in the year 1239, they were taken to the Cathedral of Termoli in Italy, where they remain today. Almost 2,000 years later, on the 26th of January, the Church celebrates St. Timothy and St. Titus together. It is no coincidence that it is one day after the feast of the conversion of St. Paul on the 25th, because they lived through Paul's entire experience and continued the mission when the Master departed. In Ephesus, in Crete, in Termoli, and throughout the Catholic world, millions of faithful celebrate these 2 young men who changed history. And the lesson they leave us is radical. Witness is not measured by age, but by fidelity. Timothy was in his early 20s when he became a bishop. Titus was a pagan whom Paul refused to circumcise. No one would bet on them. But when Paul asked for the cloak, it was not just to protect himself from the cold. It was the symbol of a mission being passed on, from old hands to young hands, from one generation to another. And today, that same mission continues, in the hands of those who remain faithful when everyone else flees.